All right, so here's another example using the quadratic formula. So once again, you need to identify your A, B, and C values. So this 2 would be my A value, the negative 14 would be my B value, and the 23 would be my C value. And your quadratic formula is x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So now we're just going to plug those values in. The first step is just plugging them in. I'm not going to worry about simplifying anything at this point. So minus, well, I need b, and b is 14, but that's already negative. So a negative times a negative will be a positive. So that'll be positive 14 plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, I need to know what 14 times 14 is in order to square that. So it's actually going to be negative 14, negative 14 squared is going to give me a positive 196. So that'll be 196 minus 4 times my A value, which is 2, times my C value, which is 23. And that's all going to be divided by 2 times my A value, which is 2. So now I've plugged in all the numbers. Now it's a matter of simplifying this. So the 14 is still there, plus or minus the square root. And I'm just going to grab my calculator and do all of that math in my calculator. So I'm going to go 196 minus, and I'm going to do parentheses, 4 times 2 times 23 is going to be 12. So this whole number here, 196 minus 4 times 2 times 23, simplifies down to 12. And I'm going to divide that by 2 times 2, which is 4. So this now is 14 plus or minus the square root of 12 over 4. Well, I know the square root of 12 can be simplified, so I should simplify that radical. So if you remember, I can write the square root of 12 as the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. But the square root of 4 is 2, so that will be 2 times the square root of 3. So I can rewrite this as 14 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 3 all over 4. All right, well, that's great, except if you can look at all three of these numbers, this number, and the number in front of your radical, if all three of those can be reduced, which means it can be divided by the same number, then you should reduce it. But all three of them have to be able to be reduced. If only 2 of them can be reduced, then don't reduce. It has to be all 3. So I can divide each one of those by 2. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. The square root of 3 is still there. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. So that here will be my final answer. 7 plus or minus 1 times the square root of 3 over 2. And again, this 1 can be there or it can be left off. The 1 is understood. It's really personal preference. I'd like to do one more with you because there's kind of one more unique answer that you need to be aware of. So let's take the equation 5x squared plus 3x plus 1 equals 0. And once again, you need to identify your A, B, and C values. And you're going to plug them into your quadratic formula. So x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so minus, well, my b value is 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, 3 times 3 is 9. Minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is 1. And I'll put that all over 2 times a, which would be 2 times 5. Okay, well, again, once again, I have all those numbers put in there. All I have to do now is simplify this. So minus 3 plus or minus the square root. Again, I'm going to go to my calculator and just put that in my calculator to simplify it. So I've got 9 minus, and again, I'm going to open my parentheses, 4 times 5 times 1 is going to give me a negative 11 all over 2 times 5, which is 10. Well, here, right here, if you remember, you cannot have a negative underneath your radical. So as soon as you see you have a negative underneath your radical, your answer right now should be no real solution. Now, when you go on to Algebra 2, you'll see that there actually is a way to solve this. But here for Algebra 1, we're going to leave it at that there's no real solution. If you have questions, let me know.